This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
We finally got back to our squadron in India, and we started bombing all the bridges and everything. And the bridge over the River Kwai, we bombed that twice. We had a lot of fun coming back after we dropped our bombs. The Japs were using sampan type boats. They hauled their supplies with that because we bombed all the railroad bridges. We'd get down and we'd see a bunch of them, sampans, and we'd go down and our backwash, we'd tip them over. And we thought it was quite a lot of fun doing that.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm your host, Jessica Beatty. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. It killed an estimated 80,000 people and fatally wounded thousands more. Even after that, Japan's Supreme War Council would not surrender. 2 days later, on August 8th, the U.S. dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. Japan finally surrendered on August 15th. 74 years have passed since then. Today we hear from a World War II veteran who was stationed in the China-Burma-India Theater of Operations. Richard Kern is 94 years old now, but he was just a teen when he went to war. Here is his story.
I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, on December 29th, 1925. I was born at home. My grandma was a midwife. I was taken care of by my grandma and my mother.
What was it like for you growing up in Minnesota?
Normal, I think, too. I started playing with model airplanes when I was about, 10, 11, 12 years old. We used to make, we called them rubber-powered airplanes. We covered the wings, and that was, they called it silk span at that time. And you'd glue it on, and then you'd use water to stretch it out and take all the wrinkles out of it. And that's how I got started in my life.
On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese military attacked Pearl Harbor. It was a Sunday morning. Richard was flying model planes in an old farm field when it happened. A man who lived nearby ran over to tell them about the attack. The next day, Richard and 3 others enlisted. He was just 17 years old.
I didn't graduate with our class because I enlisted in the Air Force when I was 17 years old. And they said that when I enlisted that they'll let me finish high school. Well, 2 months after I was sworn in, they called me in for active duty.
What did your family think when you enlisted?
What do they? I mean, I could have got drafted and been the same thing. So they thought that was wonderful that you get into something that you like.
So you went into the Air Force, right?
I went in the Air Force in what they call the cadet program. We went into basic training in the cadet program. And we were there, 3 months, I think. And from there I got washed out. We had too many pilots, I guess, at the time.
You wanted to be a pilot?
Yeah. So then they sent me to gunnery school in Harlingen, Texas. And I graduated from there, and they kept me back as an instructor on 50 caliber machine guns. In my training on gunnery, 50 caliber machine guns was what we used in our bombers and a lot of the other airplanes. And one of the programs was that you had to be able to take a gun apart, blindfolded, and put it back together, and then take it out and shoot it. I was the only one in a class of about 40 guys that could do that.
The reason they had to do it blindfolded is because you could not see the gun behind the gunnery and turrets. You could only see the side of it where the bullets went through. Since he was the only one who could do it blindfolded, he was promoted.
So consequently, they kept me back as an instructor in the gunnery school. And I hated that, so I talked to the commanding officer that I wanted to get out from under it. So
Why did you hate it?
I wanted to get into action. So I wanted to get more flying in, you know. So they sent me then to Santa Ana, California, where we got picked in an air crew. So we had 6 enlisted men and, 6. And then we had 4 officers. We had a bombardier, a navigator, a co-pilot, and a pilot. And they were all officers. All the rest of us were non-commissioned officers. And we got our training in Walla Walla, Washington as a crew. And in that program we got to do a lot of bombing and a lot of training as a crew.
What was your role in the crew?
My role was tail gunner and assistant engineer on a B-24.
Was the training difficult?
Oh, sure. They make you work. They have goals they have to meet, and they're training you to do things that you're supposed to be able to do in the service. A lot of it was hard work.
So how did you get from the U.S. to your station overseas?
When we got through with the crew training, they sent us down to San Francisco, California, and we picked up a brand new airplane, a B-24. We spent a couple of days getting organized on the airplane, going through it and flying it to check things out. And then we started across the United States, and we flew into Newfoundland, and from Newfoundland we went to the Azores, then across North Africa, through Calcutta, and then up into India, into Bombay in India, our first one. Then we went up to a little town called Asansol, which was a very small village, but they had that was our air base there. So. And we lived together. We all lived together when we got overseas. We had what we called a basha. The officers had the top part of it, and we had the back part of it. It was a straw hut type deal. In our bashas, we called them, our huts, we had a bear, we called him a bearer, and he did all of our laundry and kept us clean, or kept the place clean. And I think we paid him about 25 cents a month wages for him, and that was big money for them.
What was it like interacting with the locals?
We didn't get much to do. There wasn't any town that was worthwhile to go to. Went in there a couple of times to eat. We got in a big discussion with the British that had a training camp close by. They didn't like us. They always wanted to fight with us down there. Until they found out that we carry weapons with us. They kind of backed off.
It was like a competition? Maybe?
Well, they were mostly ground people. We called them ground pounders. They were the infantry guys. And, of course, being in the Air Force, we had a place to come back every day, have a nice bed, and have stuff to go on. Those guys were sitting in pup tents out in the desert or wherever they might be. So they kind of envy us.
Were you ever afraid at all, or was it more exciting?
It was exciting. You know, when you're flying, you're watching this and watching that. And we're always watching to see if the Japs are out there with the fighter planes. So they kept us busy. A lot of times after we dropped the bombs, we could sit and relax for the trip back to our base. A lot of times we had flak. Flak was what they were shooting up at us, and we called it the flak. It was actually a projectile that goes up and then it explodes. And when you're flying, we had to be looking for fighters, and each one of us had a gun position, and we were on communication with the pilot and co-pilot all the time. And if anybody, like if somebody in the waist gunner saw something, he'd report it to the pilot. We'd all hear it on our intercom. When you're sitting up there like a dead duck and they're down there shooting up, you'd see black puffs all over. And the aircraft guns were set for so much altitude, and then they'd explode. And all the projectile they had in there would be flying around. And it sounded just like somebody was out with a chain on hitting up on the fuselage of your vehicle, because you hear it.
90% of their missions were bombing railroad bridges to cut off Japanese supplies. On the way back from one mission, they got hit by flak and had to land in Calcutta. When the pilot put the gear down, one tire was flat. He yelled back and said he couldn't land with one flat tire and one good tire. So he asked if Richard could shoot the good tire so they could land. And he did. After that, he was checked out as an engineer.
After we got through bombing all the bridges in French Indochina, we started hauling gasoline up to the fighter ships up in China, going across the Himalayas. We call it the Hump.
The Hump was a high-altitude aerial supply route between India, going through Burma, and into southwestern China. It was the first long-range aerial supply line in history, and it was started in the spring of 1942, when China lost its last remaining supply line to the outside world, which was the Burma Road. The road was hundreds of miles long, going from Burma into China, and it was lost when Japanese troops invaded. In order to enable China's army to keep going, they had to figure out another way to get fuel and supplies to the Chinese army. The only available air route to China was the Hump, but it was also the most dangerous route because of its high terrain and severe weather. When Richard's crew got to Bombay, they were given a different plane that had been modified for the Hump. A lot of the plane's armor was stripped down to make it lighter.
We only had myself and three officers, and an engineer, and a radio operator, and myself. We'd fly to India, pick up some gas. We had our Bombay tanks in the airplane. Each one of them held 750 gallons of fuel. And we'd haul it up to the fighter ships, and then they'd take 55-gallon barrels and roll them over, and we'd hand pump gas into the barrels, and we'd fly back to India and pick up gas again, and then come back, go to the fighter ships, and drop the gas off. That was during the monsoon season. We couldn't do much flying on bombing runs and that, so.
There was another danger present in the form of captured American planes. According to Kern, some C-47s had been captured by the Japanese. They would put 20mm cannons on the waist of the plane, and when they saw an American C-47, they'd fly over close and shoot them down. On their first mission across the Hump, a C-47 came up close to Richard's plane, but pulled away in a hurry when they saw all the guns pointed at them. Richard and his crew flew the Hump about 20 times, and they were lucky. About 600 planes crashed, and over 1,600 men died flying the Hump. When the monsoon season was over, they went back to India.
We finally got back to our squadron in India, and we started bombing all the bridges and everything. And the bridge over the River Kwai, we bombed that twice. We had a lot of fun coming back after we dropped our bombs. The Japs were using sampan type boats that had a kind of a flat bottom, and they had one big sail, and they hauled their supplies with that because we bombed all the railroad bridges and any bridge that would give them a place to travel on. So we'd get down and we'd see a bunch of them, sampans, and we'd go down, and our backwash, we'd tip them over. So we thought it was quite a lot of fun doing that.
You mentioned that you bombed the bridge over the River Kwai. I know there was a novel and a movie about that and how the Japanese used prisoners of war to keep rebuilding it. Could you explain why that bridge was so important?
Because it was the biggest bridge they had in whole French Indochina, and that was the main supply bridge for railroads to bring all the supplies to the Japs. They were trying to get into China from the south side, going across the Himalayas. So they had a big base there that they were getting ready to go through. And consequently, if you don't have supplies, you can't do much more. So that was our main mission, to keep them from going through China from the back end, or bottom part. I enjoyed going up to China. We are in a really old part of China where they still bound the ladies' feet. And it was an experience. You see those little kids walking on stubs, more or less, you know. And then being in China is really a backward country at that time. Yeah, it was a wholly different life. But being young and over 19 years old, so, I was looking to have a little excitement,
Richard's crew was on a mission to bomb a Japanese warship in the Bay of Bengal when they got the call.
And we got word via radio to drop your bombs and come on back. We didn't know what was going on. We got back and they said that the war will be over in a couple of weeks.
The U.S. had just bombed Hiroshima.
Stopped the war right away. So we sat in our base for about a week, and then they sent us to Calcutta, and they put us on a troop transport back to home in the U.S.
Richard's crew was broken up. The pilot, co-pilot, and navigator got a B-24 to fly back to the U.S. The rest were put on a troop ship run by the Coast Guard. They called them Victory ships. It was converted into a troop carrier, and it took the ship 29 days to get back to the U.S.
Went through the Bay of Bengal, the Suez Canal, and through the Mediterranean, I guess they called it there, and then into Atlantic, and they got into New York Harbor. And we were the first troops to come back after the war from China-Burma-India theater.
When they got back to New York Harbor, the Salvation Army was the first to greet them, with donuts, milk, and coffee on hand.
I think we spent about a week there going through our physicals and getting new uniforms. And seeing that I was the only one from the Midwest, they put me in charge of about 25 guys to take them to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. So we got to McCoy, and we were there for about, 2 or 3 weeks, and then they gave us a furlough to come home. They called it delay en route. And I got delayed in Duluth, and I had to go to Santa Ana, California. And in Santa Ana, California was a basic training for Air Force draftees. I think 25 or 30 guys in my section that I was in charge of. I didn't have enough points to get out. Most of the other guys that were in our crew were older guys, and a lot of them got out right away and some didn't.
What was it like coming home?
Very nice. Nice feeling to get back again.
Was it difficult to transition back to civilian life?
I didn't think it was. I think a lot of the other guys probably did. I did. I still enjoyed life.
You said that when you came back from the war, that most other people were able to get out right away because of their points, but you couldn't. How long did it take you to get out?
I could have got out probably earlier than I did, but I enjoyed being in California because it was in the wintertime. And then they put me in charge of basic trainees, and I had a barracks full of, I don't know, probably 60, 70 guys. And a lot of them were just young kids going in at 18 years old. And I stayed in the same barracks as they did. And I had my office there, and then I also had my room to sleep in.
How old were you?
A bunch of babies. First time away from home, and but the war was over, but they were still calling on draftees. Kids, and I had some bunch of old people.
Old people? What do you mean by old people?
The young kids were probably first time away from home, and they'd come, oh gosh, I want to go home. And yeah, it was different.
How old were you when you were there?
19. They were just getting into the service after 18. You get drafted at 18. So I was probably 19, 20 years old.
If you're wondering what he meant by old people, he meant that he was the old person at age 19 or 20. So what did you do after that?
Well, after the war, I came home and I signed up to go to college under the GI Bill. And I went to State Teachers College, which is now UMD. And I put in, I think it was about 3 months, and my uncle got sick out, and they lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and my mother, I was still at home. My mother wanted to go out and see her brother, so she asked me if I could drive her out there. So I dropped out of school and drove her out there, and I spent about 6 months in Cheyenne, Wyoming. My uncle had a photography studio there. We were taking pictures, and mostly they had army camps all around in that area, and he'd go out and make a special. My job was to make proofs of the film, and then we had a guy that went around and tried to sell more pictures to the people, and they'd bring it back, and then I would finish the orders put them in the package, and the salesman would take them, and then he'd take them back to the people he sold them to. But I was with my uncle for quite a few months after the war. I wish I could have stayed out there. He was a multimillionaire at that time. When I came back from there, I didn't go back to college because I had left. When I first got into the college, I got called into the dean's office, and he said, I noticed on your application bank that you didn't have a high school diploma. And I said, well, when you're 18 years old, you don't get a high school diploma when you have to go into service. Oh, yeah, well, he says, well, if you can get your diploma get a hold of George Beck, who was a principal at Central High School. So he was a good friend of my mother and dad, so I called George up, or my dad did, and he found out that I could get my night school. And so I finished off my English and what other subjects at night school. So I got my diploma. So when I got my diploma, I went back to college for a couple of weeks, and I decided I didn't dig that anymore. So when I got out of it.
You've been very successful throughout your life, and as you told me before, you learned to fly after the war. You owned your own planes and were successful in business. You even helped out in the 1980 Olympics. But it seems like you didn't get a lot of traditional schooling. What would you say is something important that you learned just from being out in the world?
In junior high, I got involved in mechanical drawing. And in that course, we got through with mechanical drawing. The instructor says, you guys that had mechanical drawing, what did you draw up? And so he says, why don't you take the best piece that you got there and go to the pattern making shop and make a pattern and make it the thing you did. And I submitted that to the foundry, and then they called you in. You're going to make that thing in the foundry. And so we made that in the foundry, and then from there, you drew it up on mechanical drawing part, and then made it in the foundry. So you started on your basics, and then you went from the foundry into the machine shop and machined it. So that was a good experience for me.
It seems like a lot of things that you did, you just kind of jumped in and learned by doing instead of studying.
A lot of stuff I didn't know how to do it when I started, and I get a hold of a book and tell me exactly what to do.
Do you have any advice for young people these days?
Go on the service and find out what it's all about.
Mr. Kern is the last member of his crew. He served in the National Guard for 28 years, and he is still flying his model airplanes. I'd like to thank Mr. Kern for sharing his story. I filled in the gaps with a previous interview Mr. Kern did at the Richard Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin. That interview was done in 2011 by Jerry Sandvik. Once again, I'm Jessica Beatty. Thanks for listening to America Daily. Until next time.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.